Okay. Good day to you. My name is Chuck Bodecker with the no. Oh, my name is Chuck Bodecker, and today I'm talking to
Gary Goff.
Gary. And Gary, tell me your background. What did you fly in the military?
I started out when I graduated from pilot training in Del Rio, Texas in 1981. I was assigned to the OV-10 in Germany, and I flew that for 3 years, and then my follow-on assignment was an F-15 in the Far East.
Okay. Tell me about those airplanes. The OV-10, what type of airplane is that?
The OV-10 is it was nicknamed the Bronco. It was a forward air controller airplane, which meant that you were flying at a slower speed than the fighters that are flying at about 500 miles an hour. And since you're flying at a much slower airspeed, you could find targets in jungles and difficult places, and you could shoot a rocket at a target, mark it for the fighters that are flying really fast, so that they could then know where to bomb if they couldn't actually see the target.
Okay.
The F-15 was all air-to-air. That was built specifically as a dogfighter from the old World War I days, and so that's what I did, all air-to-air in the F-15 while I was in the Far East.
So when you flew the OV-10, you were where?
In Europe, Western Europe at the time, in the 80s, Germany was still divided, and so we had East and West Germany. We had NATO versus the Warsaw Pact. So there was, the Cold War was very hot and heavy, I guess is what you could say. And so my job was to defend the Army, help use air support to defend the Army troops whenever they had to do any kind of battling. And we'd use air power to do that.
This is what years?
1981, I was there from 81 to 84. And then Congress decommissioned our squadrons, and so we had to bring the OV-10s back to the United States. And so 11-day trip across the North Atlantic, we were able to bring the airplanes back to the United States.
That must have been interesting.
Yeah, that was started off, we flew from Germany to Scotland, then to Iceland, then to Germany, then to northern Canada, then to southern Canada, and then finally across the United States.
So it was not a non-stop trip?
No. It was about, each leg was about 3 to 4 hours.
And how many aircraft were in the flight?
We deployed 12 at a time, put 6 airplanes on the flying formation on one C-130, and then the other 6 airplanes on the second C-130. The C-130s were there for rescue and for navigation, since this is way before GPS.
Oh, okay. But that, in other words, you were a flight of one C-130 and X number of OV-10s.
I was the number 4, fourth airplane on one of the formations, yes.
Okay.
Of 6.
And 6 formations?
Of 6 airplane. You have a C-130 here, and you have 3 on this wing, 3 on this wing, and then in trail, about a mile later in trail, you have the second C-130 with its 3 on each wing. And that's how we flew across the North Atlantic.
So, and it was, what was the typical length of the flight? How far did you go and where did you land?
When we would, the missions in Europe were typically about 2.5 hour long missions, and we would practice airstrikes. When we flew across the Atlantic, it took about 3 to 4 hours roughly to go from each, basically island hopping, first to Iceland, then to Greenland, and then to Canada. And that's how we did it.
Okay. And where'd you wind up?
We ended up in Southern California. The Air Force Base was called George Air Force Base in Victorville, California.
I know where it is.
Yeah.
So, and then after that, you transitioned to the F-15, is that correct?
Yes. And that took about a year for training, and then I was assigned to 44th Attack Fighter Squadron, Vampire Bats. They had a lot of fame in World War II, and at Kadena Air Force Base in Okinawa, Japan.
Yep, I know that very well. So, did you fly the F-15s in Vietnam, is that correct?
No. This was all during the Cold War, so it'd all be during the 80s. So in 1985, I spent most of the year training on the F-15, such that in 1986 is when I arrived on Okinawa to start flying as a squadron.
Okay. And so you flew missions out of Okinawa, is that
Out of
correct?
Okinawa, we would, our air defense alert commitment was in Korea. So there's 3 squadrons, and so each squadron would rotate every 3 months to sit alert against the North Koreans. And actually in 1988, when the Summer Olympics were held in Seoul, South Korea, the Winter Olympics were just held this year in '08. So 30 years ago, I was sitting alert when North Korea sent 2 MiGs, that's their aircraft, down to, they wanted to bomb the Olympics, and we had to stop them.
That's not a good thing.
So we got to alert scramble and stop the North Korean aircraft from disrupting the Olympics.
And where were you based at the time?
That was in places called Osan Air Force Base, and it's just, I can't remember how far, but it's just, I think, south of Seoul, I think is where, I just can't remember. That's 30 years ago, it's too long. My brain doesn't work that far.
It's close to Seoul, I've been there. Okay, so anyway, that was pretty much the
Military career, yes.
military career. What do you conduct tours here and presentations here at the
Museum.
museum. What do you find? What type of presentations do you do, and what kind of aircraft do you talk about? You talk about the airplanes you flew in.
Right, and my docent technique may be a little different than some others because I'm more for the operational side. I got involved with when the museum was originally the OV-10 Bronco Association, which started out in a closet and was there to help it grow, and I've made some of the displays here in the museum, and it is that museum has now grown into what is now the museum we currently reside in. So all the airplanes except for one that are out there in the yard, I have either controlled as an OV-10 pilot or I have fought against when I was an F-15 in dogfights.
That's interesting.
So when I take on tours through the museum, mine is more from an operational perspective of what it's like to either fly or control or fight these airplanes, in addition to giving the audience a historical perspective on why we do what we do. And I think that's the most important thing is to answer the why question. Why is this happening? Or why did that happen? And so that's what I like to. That's my, I guess my bent, my natural bent, is that historical part.
The historical part is that you actually have flown the OV-10 and the F-15, so you can speak from experience.
From experience, the OV-10 is, why is it so important to be able to develop critical thinking skills that kids, when they're growing up through schools, because when you're in the OV-10, I had to control all different types of fighters with all sorts of different types of ammunition, and the problem isn't always an easy A plus B equals C. You may have to bring in other factors, and that critical thinking skills are what I like to talk to about, especially with kids, and why it's so important to gain those skills while you're going up through the school system. And it's very critical. And in the air-to-air arena, nothing goes as planned. Never. It's always fluid, and you have to be able to think on your toes, so to speak, and you have to be able to develop the skills to solve problems in a very, very, very short amount of time.
Okay, very good. If you were talking to a group of young people, what would you suggest that they study in school?
You have to, obviously, you're going to have a pretty good handle of mathematics. That's just a normal thing. There's a lot of math involved in flying airplanes, but I like the sciences because it teaches you to, it gives you a problem that you need to find the solution to by testing different options to find the correct solution. And those skills, that critical thinking skills, is what I find most effective as a pilot, as a fighter pilot, especially in today's combat world, that military aviators have to deal with much significantly changing situations and dealing with all the new technology that is out there.
Now, what would you suggest a kid focus on in school? A student, what do you recommend that they focus on?
That's a great question. The more well-rounded you are as an individual, the more that you have a working knowledge of, all that comes into play when you're going to fly fighter aircraft. So it's like all the courses, whether it be English or science or math or whatever that you have to go through school, getting a fundamental what would be the word? A fundamental grasp of these subject matters, because obviously you have to be able to talk quickly and get your point across in as few words as possible. So you've got to be able to have a good handle on the English language. You've got to be able to have a good handle on being able to calculate in your mind mathematical problems, all of that. And the more well-rounded you are as you come out of high school and college, the better I think you are equipped to fly fighters, because it demands so much attention.
So stay with your education.
Oh, you have. That's why they require 4-year degrees to get into the Air Force, and I assume the Marines and the Navy are the same way to fly for them. Is because they need you to have that skill set already established before you go learn how to fly the airplane.
So stay in school.
Oh yes, you better stay in school, and you've got to finish, and you've got to be aggressively minded in finding the answers to the problems that are out there.
Very good. Good advice.
Thank you.
Eric.
Thank you.